Welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. Well, Cardinal Muller is accusing Pope Francis of heresy in an article or an exclusive interview in the form of an article recently published by LifeSite News. Unfortunately, they took the article down, and so I can't show you the immediate article, but I can show you something that was quoting from it that is still left up. And I would like to interact with what Cardinal Muller has said by showing you his words recently and comparing them to what he said previously a few years ago. And I'll allow you to make of that whatever you will, but I'm going to have Cardinal Muller respond to Cardinal Muller's own accusations. And then I want to take a look at the Eighth Ecumenical Council. And I want to ask, is Cardinal Muller's behavior and accusation consistent with the Eighth Ecumenical Council and its comments about the papal magisterium? So that's what we have in store today. Ave says, I have the full article. I can email it to you. Please go ahead and email it to me. Because let me share my screen. And unfortunately, like I said, it took the article down. But you can still see here in the link of the actual article at the top. Exclusive, Cardinal Muller says Francis has uttered material heresy, but is still Pope. That is the name of the article. So I was going to take you to another source that quotes from this interview, but since you're emailing it to me, let me verify what you have. Take a look at it real quick. See if we can just go straight to that instead. There we go. Very helpful. I tried to find a copy of it on the Wayback Machine, but there were no saved copies of it, so I wasn't able to retrieve it. All right, thank you so much for that, Ave. I'll just use what you sent me instead. And what I want to do at that point, after reviewing it, is again compare it to what Cardinal Muller has said himself in 2019, just a few years ago. And so rather than it being a case of Michael Lofton responding to Cardinal Muller, I will just have Cardinal Muller respond to Cardinal Muller. And then I will compare Cardinal Muller to the Eighth Ecumenical Council. Okay, so let me share my screen with what was just sent to me. Thank you so much for that, Ave. Again, they decided to take it down. I don't know what the reason is. But that's a pretty massive claim to make in an exclusive interview. And so I don't think it's worth just letting go. I think we need to review this. Okay, so here it is. Excuse me. Exclusive. Cardinal Muller says Francis has uttered material heresy, but is still the Pope. Cardinal Muller said that Pope Francis has uttered plenty of material heresies, but argued that he has not lost office since he has not taught heresy formally. Now, already there's a problem with this. I mean, aside from the claim that he's taught heresy, right? I mean, aside from that problem, the other problem is the implicit or implied position that a formal papal heretic automatically loses the papacy. It seems like he takes that position, and that is merely a theological opinion. That is not anything that the church has ever taught. Bishop Schneider recently did an article saying the exact opposite of what Cardinal Muller is arguing here. So I could just take the route of, having Bishop Schneider respond to Cardinal Muller. Or I could just simply mention that, again, this is merely a theological opinion. that a pope who is formally a heretic automatically loses office. That is merely an opinion. And it is wrought with plenty of problems because, for instance, who is going to determine that the Pope is materially a heretic? We have a massive problem here. We don't have in the church any kind of organ that can sit in judgment of the Pope and determine that he is a material heretic. I'm sorry, a formal heretic. Um, in fact, what we do have from the Eighth Ecumenical Council is the position that only a living pope can judge a predecessor pope for such things. So the only thing that we have in church history that could answer the question is precedent where a sitting pope judged a previous pope. But no one can judge a sitting pope of formal heresy. So it's a really, this theological opinion that the cardinal is putting forward is a non-starter. It's not workable practically. It would also result in massive chaos because what happens if Cardinal Muller and a few others say that he is a formal heretic and others say, and other cardinals say he isn't a formal heretic? What do we do then? Who is going to settle the issue? It would result in massive chaos if we adopted Mueller's position that somehow we get to judge that the Pope is a formal heretic and has lost office. So let's continue here. Cardinal Muller has said that while Pope Francis has already uttered plenty of material heresies, that he has not lost his papal office because he has not taught formal heresy. In a recent opinion piece in First Things, the German cardinal stated that to teach contrary to the apostolic faith would automatically deprive the Pope of his office. Now, I think we need to make some important distinctions that the cardinal doesn't seem to be making. Being a formal heretic is not the same as teaching formal heresy. So we already need to make that distinction. Are we just merely talking about a pope being a formal heretic and he automatically loses office? Or are we talking about a pope teaching formal heresy? Here he speaks about teaching heresy, but previously, right up here, he's just simply talking about being a formal heretic and thus losing office. There's an important distinction at play there that we need to make. It's one thing to be a heretic. It's another to teach heresy. In an exclusive interview with LifeSite News, Muller expounded on the possibility of a pope losing his office if he formally teaches heresy. Well, not only do we have a difficulty in the question of what would happen if that happened, but we have the added difficulty that can you even have a pope teach heresy? That is not a given. You need to actually substantiate that it's possible for a pope to teach heresy in his magisterium. Because, in fact, there's plenty of evidence from the magisterium itself that would be to the contrary, that would indicate the pope cannot teach heresy in his magisterium. Okay, it continues. The former prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith explained there's a crucial distinction between material heresy and formal heresy. Absolutely. There's also a difference between a material heretic, formal heretic, and teaching formal heresy, right? Okay, so Mueller reiterated that a pope who teaches formal heresy could theoretically lose his office, but he added that such a case has not occurred yet in history of the church, right? And who's to say that he is a formal heretic and has lost office? And what do you have when the church is divided on the question? And some say he has lost office and others say he hasn't. Well, that is called schism. You would have a massive schism overnight. And cardinals The cardinals that would side with the position that the Pope has automatically lost the papacy would then elect a new Pope, while the cardinals who say he hasn't lost office would continue to maintain that the current Pope is the Pope, and now you have two claimants to the throne, and thus you have chaos. And here is how we would start the Western Schism all over again, where we ended up with two and sometimes three people claiming to be the Pope. So this theory that Cardinal Muller is putting forward is actually very dangerous, because if it's really carried out, it will inevitably lead to schisms in the church. Okay, so he referred to the example of Pope Honorius, who was retrospectively condemned as a heretic at the Third Council of Constantinople. Muller explained that Honorius had taught materially false statements, but not heresy in the strict sense. Cardinal Muller is historically in error on this point. Honorius did not teach anything materially false. As Pope John IV said, Pope John IV wrote an apology for Honorius, vindicating him from this false claim that is being made by the cardinal. So did Maximus the Confessor. So the cardinal is just factually mistaken on this point in history. Be that as it may, what did the Eighth Ecumenical Council say about this question? Unfortunately, Cardinal Muller doesn't say. Fortunately for you, I will tell you. Here is what the Eighth Ecumenical Council says about the case of Pope Honorius. This is from the Acts of the Eighth Ecumenical Council, Constantinople 4, 869 to 870. I'm reading from page 314 of my English edition. The third address by the pontiff, which was read out loud by Peter the deacon. This is from the 7th session. This effrontery is intolerable, beloved, and I confess the hearing of my heart cannot endure it. What are they referring to? They're referring to Patriarch Photius of Constantinople, who rashly judged the papacy and was anathematized for it. And they're saying that even hearing this, they can't endure it. The impiety of Photius to judge the Pope. Who of you, I pray, ever heard of such a thing or encountered such immense presumption, at least in reading? In other words, it's presumptuous to judge the Pope. Although we have read of the Roman pontiff passing judgment on the prelates of all the churches, we have not read of anyone having passed judgment on him. For even though Honorius was anathematized after his death by the Easterners, it should be known that he had been accused of heresy, which is the only offense where inferiors have the right to resist the initiatives of their superiors or are free to reject their false opinions. And here's the kicker. Although, even in this case, no patriarch or other bishop has the right of passing any judgment on him, unless the consent of the Pope of the same first see has authorized it. So what are they saying? They're saying only a living Pope can judge a previous Pope. And they're saying nobody can judge a living Pope. They're saying the only time a Pope was judged was in the case of Honorius, and even in that case, it was the living Pope judging Pope Honorius, who was already deceased. So Cardinal Muller bringing up the case of Honorius does not help his case, because it is not relevant to the current context. Because if we're speaking about judging Pope Francis, last time I checked, is still alive. He's not dead. So we don't have a new Pope judging Pope Francis. Pope Francis is the living Pope. Pope Francis could judge a previous Pope. He could also judge Cardinal Muller, by the way. But nobody can judge Pope Francis, not only per canon law, but also per the Eighth Ecumenical Council that anathematizes anybody who does such a thing as judging the first see. And judging the first see in this context isn't just a canonical judgment, but is a judgment of his magisterium. So to accuse the Pope of heresy is what they're referring to. They say that is rash, it is anathematized. Two patriarchs were anathematized for this, Photius and also Dioscorus of Alexandria back in 449 when he attempted to judge Pope Leo the Great. He was also by name condemned here and also condemned at the Council of Chalcedon in the year 451 for doing such a thing. So for Cardinal Muller to bring this up, it doesn't help his case, and it doesn't also account for what the Eighth Ecumenical Council actually says about the case of Honorius. It continues, heresy in the proper sense includes the will to contradict the truth. Even church fathers made theological errors, he said. So he's distinguishing between material heresy and formal heresy. Formal, which would be obstinate and willful. It continues, but that which was the case at the time of Pope Honorius, this term heresy, what was materially wrong, and no judgment was made about the intention. Later, the personal will was added to the classical term formal heresy. Muller addressed the example of Pope John the 22nd. This is an example I refuted yesterday. Again, it's not the first time, but it is a most recent example. Muller addressed the example of Pope John the 22nd, who in his sermons held the false view that souls would only attain the beatific vision. After the Last Judgment, he later repented and corrected his views. This was a theological opinion, which was only later theologically precisely clarified. And thus John the 22nd did not teach formal heresy, Muller told LifeSite News. I would also add, he didn't teach material heresy, since at that time, the Holy See had not issued a judgment on it. So the case of John the 22nd is entirely irrelevant to this question and discussion. So I'm a little confused as to why he's bringing it up, unless he's just raising it to make a distinction between formal and material heresy. But even then, it's not applicable because there had not been a dogmatic judgment on the question until his successor. So thus, it was not technically heresy at the time. Plus, he also didn't teach it in his magisterium, so it's really irrelevant to the larger question. Okay, so he added that John the 22nd had expressed himself imprudently and imprecisely. Actually, we were already a step further. He was speaking out of unresolved older positions. Muller explained that the question of when the beatific vision begins was not yet dogmatically settled at the time of John the 22nd. Naming a similar example, he had said that the number of sacraments was not explicitly taught until the 11th century, and that John the 22nd statements were made during a similar clarification phrase. The popes before the 11th century did not explicitly say there are 7 sacraments, no more, no less, before the concepts of sacrament was clarified. John the 22nd's false teaching was during this clarification phase. The prelate stated, in the Eastern Church and the early Church, it was not yet so clear when the beatific vision began. For the saints and martyrs, yet, yes, but of otherwise, people who do not die in a state of mortal sin and the remnants of venial sin have already been dealt with, who have gone through purgatory, receive the beatific vision, he said. But when it comes to eschatology, it's a bit difficult to differentiate, since there is individual eschatology and universal eschatology, Muller continued. For us, it diverges in time. For God, it is one again. It is difficult to express it precisely and to avoid one-sidedness. The position that a pope could become a heretic and lose his office was expressed by St. Robert Bellarmine, a cardinal and doctor of the church, who wrote about the issue in the second book of his work on the Roman pontiff. According to Bellarmine, the pope, who is manifestly a heretic, ceases by himself to be pope and head in the same way as he ceases to be a Christian and a member of the body, and for this reason he can be judged and punished by the church. Now, as I've said many times, you'll notice what is missing here. In bringing up Bellarmine, what is conspicuously missing from Cardinal Muller's point? Aha. It is the claim that Bellarmine himself did not believe a pope could ever be a heretic. So, yes, Bellarmine was of the opinion that if a manifestly heretical pope was manifestly heretical, then yeah, he would cease to be pope automatically. But the whole point for Bellarmine is you would never have that, since no pope can be a heretic. They always leave that part out from discussions about Bellarmine. Also, what they leave out is manifest heretic, which is not the same as a formal heretic. Now, you remember Muller was originally talking about a formal heretic, and then he brings up Bellarmine's manifest heresy. Well, for Bellarmine, manifest heresy means a pope who has been rebuked twice by the proper authorities. So not something that you just judge privately, but a pope who has twice been rebuked per the admonition of St. Paul. Which is different than a formal heretic, because somebody can be a formal heretic without being a manifest heretic. So they generally don't make those distinctions, and I'll just note that they're missing here as well. Okay, it continues. While Cardinal Muller said that Pope Francis has already uttered plenty of material heresies, that's quite a claim. He stressed that Francis has not committed formal heresy and therefore has not forfeited his papal office. I want to ask you, in light of what we just read from the Eighth Ecumenical Council, has Cardinal Muller violated the Eighth Ecumenical Council when it says that only a sitting pope can judge a previous pope's magisterium? When he accuses the pope of uttering plenty of material heresies, has he violated the Eighth Ecumenical Council's 21st canon? Canon 21 of Constantinople IV, as understood by the Council Fathers in the Acts that I just read to you. That's a question that you should consider. Is the cardinal in violation of the Eighth Ecumenical Council on this point? Muller argued that though Francis's implicit promotion and toleration of same-sex blessings, now let's just stop there. He takes that for granted. Implicit promotion and toleration of same-sex blessings. Does he tolerate it? No, because Pope Francis in 2021 has already judged that you cannot have such a thing. So you can't call that toleration. That would not be toleration when he has already formally in his magisterium in a 2021 dubia said, no, that's not toleration. And he says promotion. When did Pope Francis promote explicitly or implicitly same-sex blessings? He didn't. As I've shown, the July dubia from 2023 has Pope Francis talking about blessing persons, not unions. Individuals, not unions. And Cardinal Muller, Cardinal Fernandez, who is Cardinal Muller's successor at the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Muller backs up what I've said here about Pope Francis in an interview that LifeSite News sat on for over 3 weeks before releasing it, where Cardinal Fernandez explicitly says that the church cannot and does not bless homosexual unions. And he just said that September 30th, so that's very recent. So Cardinal Muller is absolutely incorrect in this false accusation that he has made against Pope Francis. And so when we ask, what are these material heresies? And the first thing he gives us is a false accusation, I'm not impressed. He continues. Muller argued that though Francis's implicit promotion and toleration of same-sex blessings and Holy Communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, the Pope is fostering a heresy of practice. Well, I want to read to you Cardinal Muller's own words to refute Cardinal Muller. So here's Cardinal Muller from just 4 years ago versus Cardinal Muller of today. And what has changed? Nothing has changed in the data except further proving Cardinal Muller wrong, because Pope Francis has also responded to a dubia for Cardinal Duca on the question of Amoris Laetitia, further proving this false accusation that Cardinal Muller just made, further proving it wrong. So not only has nothing changed in favor of what Cardinal Muller is currently saying, but in fact, there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. So I'll just simply quote to you Cardinal Muller's old interview versus Cardinal Muller now. And then I'll just ask you, which Cardinal Muller do you want me to believe? The Cardinal Muller here, or the Cardinal Muller in an interview that LifeSite News just yanked down and can't be found anywhere? Which Cardinal Muller am I supposed to believe, and why is my question. Why? Okay, so accusing Pope of heresy is the worst thing, says Muller. The church is going through one of the worst crises in its entire history. Accusing Pope of heresy is the worst thing that can happen in the Church of the Living God, says former CDF prefect Cardinal Gerhard Muller. Well, gee, it looks like he's changed his view, because used to he thought it was the worst thing ever to accuse the Pope of heresy, and now he seems to be doing just that. The former prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Muller, has defended Pope Francis against the accusation of heresy that have been made against him, but has cautioned against idealizing Francis. Sounds like my view. Gosh, I like that, Cardinal Muller. Sounds like he and I could get along. Accusations of heresy against the representative of the true faith revealed in Christ are the worst thing that can happen in the Church of the Living God, pillar support of the truth. Well said, Cardinal Muller of 2019. I think that that's a wonderful response to the Cardinal Muller of 2023. It continues. It was principally wrong to blame the Pope for everything that was going wrong in the church today, he said. But the corresponding public remonstrances by well-known theologians should be answered. I like him. Their worries were understandable, and the desire for greater clarity as far as statements by the Pope were concerned were justified. But the means the theologians had chosen were not. So he was not in favor in 2019 of the dubia cardinals publicly releasing their dubia questions. He continues, it would be important for the Holy Father to have the CDF and not the state secretariat or journalists or theologians that he is on good terms with publish an official clarification. The flaws in recent papal documents were in his eyes caused by the fact that the documents had been prepared by people who may well be the Pope's friends but are neither officially nor professionally qualified theologically. They have incurred a heavy burden of guilt upon themselves by causing irritations which have greatly harmed the Pope and the papacy. It was a fact that the church was, at the moment, going through one of the worst crises in its entire history, acknowledged Muller. It would not continue to exist if it turned into a religious political NGO and relativized the faith revealed to it by Jesus Christ. Asked what he would advise Pope Francis to reply to the dubia cardinals who were still waiting for an answer from him, Muller said the whole affair should never have been made public, but should have been settled internally. We believe in the one church of Christ united in faith and love, he said. I miss that Cardinal Muller. Where is that Cardinal Muller? I wish he was still around. The Cardinal Muller who sees the wisdom in not publishing publicly dubias and publicly undermining the magisterium of the Holy Father. He warned against interchurch divisions. It was wrong to celebrate Pope Francis as the best pope in church history at the expense of all of his predecessors. All the talk about opposition to Francis came from ideologues who wanted to lead the church into the abyss. You hear that? Those who were opposing Pope Francis were ideologues. Huh. Does Cardinal Muller think he's an ideologue now? It was time for Pope Francis to say a clear word on the unity of all Catholics and revealed faith, Muller underlined. Well, again, like I say, I think this Cardinal Muller seemed more reasonable. And I don't know what has changed, because nothing in the facts have changed that would allow for a reversal of this position. In fact, the facts that have been revealed would further condemn what the cardinal is accusing the Pope of here. It continues in his LifeSite article that was mysteriously taken down. At the Synod, where many expect or fear that the homosexual blessings will now be introduced, to write a public letter to these LGBT organizations on this question, to receive them, to be photographed with them. This was a very clear message, he said. It's a heresy of practice. Why didn't he receive a father, a mother, and their 5 children at this time? There are no photos of that. Speaking of photos, y'all do recall the photo of Cardinal Muller and Father James Martin. If we're just going to go based on photos. I don't know what a photo does anyway. I don't know why we're preoccupied with photos in this discussion, but there's an interesting photo for you. Cardinal Muller, just a few weeks ago, smiling with Father James Martin. Now, maybe I could just kind of say the same thing. And why didn't Cardinal Muller, instead of smiling and taking a photo with Father James Martin, who promotes questionable positions, why didn't he take a photo with a husband, a wife, and 5 kids? I mean, I guess people could be petty and ask such silly questions of him. So I'm not exactly sure how we got on in this interview to the photo question, but I suppose we'll move on. Muller emphasized that the desired modern changes to the church are always introduced via the pastoral way rather than by the outright teaching of formal heresy. Muller noted a statement by Cardinal Victor Fernandez, the new head of the dicastery for the doctrine of faith, on allowing communion for civilly remarried divorcees without living in full continence, calling the declaration a borderline case when it comes to formal heresy. What he leaves out is the dubia to Cardinal Duca that Pope Francis, in conjunction with Fernandez, released. Why is it you don't hear anything about that? Why is it he doesn't mention it here? Because in that document, as I demonstrated, Muller is fundamentally wrong in his evaluation of that document. I'll just put a link to that video in the show notes where I review Muller versus the actual document. And the actual document does call people to live in full continence. It just says that if they fail to do that, they are to go to confession. So they do not get to go straight to communion. They are to go to confession. And that is not revolutionary. It continues. The German cardinal told LifeSite News that Fernandez said the faithful must accept this declaration by the Argentinian bishops in their interpretation of Amor Laetitia with religious obedience of mind and will. So the cardinal now has a problem with this, but in 2019, he didn't have a problem with it because the Argentinian bishop's interpretation came out in 2016. And that article that I just read to you just now by Cardinal Muller in 2019 is 3 years later. And at that time, he didn't see it as heresy. So why does he see it as problematic now? What has changed? Not sure. But it's certainly troubling to see this shift in the cardinal. Okay, Was the election of Cardinal Bergoglio to the papacy valid? That's the next section that we're going to examine. I'm going to step away, get some coffee, and we'll meet back in about 5 minutes and we'll continue.
Are you a Catholic thinking about converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? Or are you a Protestant discerning whether or not to become Catholic or Eastern Orthodox? If so, I have the book just for you. It's called Answering Orthodoxy. It engages all of the arguments that Eastern Orthodox use against the Catholic Church. I respond to all of them. I show that they are in error, and in fact, they're inconsistent, because the things that Orthodox are objecting to are in fact found in their own tradition. So the fullness of the faith can only be found in the Catholic Church. Check out the book right now at shop.catholic.com for your copy today. Hey everybody, I'm so excited to announce I have begun an Eastern Catholic podcast that is affiliated with God With Us Radio. God With Us Radio is part of an Eastern Catholic faith formation program put on by the Eastern Catholic Bishops of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And so God With Us Radio is putting out a lot of great catechetical material for Eastern Catholics so that people grow in their faith and they learn about the Eastern tradition in communion with Rome. And that's what I'm doing with this podcast, affiliated with God With Us Radio. It is called Union Without Confusion. If you go to unionwithoutconfusion.com, you'll see a list of episodes, and you will also see a new episode at least once a week on Mondays at 5 p.m. Central. So I encourage you, go to unionwithoutconfusion.com to take a look at the podcast and enjoy great content that focuses on the Eastern tradition in communion with Rome. I hope you'll check out the website and be blessed by the material. Please pray for this new endeavor. We'll see you later. God bless.
Okay, so let's continue. Share my screen. Was the election of Bergoglio to the papacy valid? LifeSide News asked Cardinal Muller whether the election of Cardinal Bergoglio to the papacy could have been invalid due to improper collusion by members of the St. Gallen Mafia before and during the conclave. John Paul II's Apostolic Constitution declares that a papal election is null and void if, among other stipulations, cardinal electors engage in any form of pact, agreement, promise, or other commitment of any kind which could oblige them to give or deny their vote to person or persons. Do you hear the problem with the question? I know I've addressed this many times. We're going to see if Cardinal Muller picks up on the error in the question. The error, as I've often demonstrated, is If you go to this apostolic constitution, the section that speaks of the election being null and void is about altering procedures related to the ballots. All of this other business about pacts, agreements, promises comes later in the document, and those are not said to be conditions that make the election null and void. Those are things that would make the cardinals excommunicated, and thus they could still participate in the election validly, though illicitly. But they conflated those two sections together as if Pope John Paul II, when he spoke about the conditions that make the election null and void, was in reference to the part where it speaks about pacts and agreements being made. So even if the claim about the St. Gallen Mafia collusion was true, it would not make the election null and void according to the Apostolic Constitution itself. And even very top-notch canonists have confirmed that, as I've demonstrated. Ed Peters being one of them. I've also shown the holes in the claim that there was collusion by the St. Gallen Mafia. I have a whole video on that showing how shoddy the evidence is for that claim. But even assuming it's true, it still wouldn't make the election null and void. So let's see if Cardinal Muller is attentive enough to pick up on this very basic error in the question. This is an error by a group that has put forward this argument that is sedevacantist, effectively. They were once known as benevacantists, but now that Benedict is dead, they're now sedevacantists. So this is a sedevacantist argument. It is erroneous. It is not factually accurate. Let's see if Cardinal Muller picks up on it and corrects it. Let's go. He says it's into doubt is already problematic. His answer should have been, first of all, you are in error. That is not an accurate representation of the Apostolic Constitution. Second of all, yes, it is valid. Next question. That should have been the answer. Instead, he says, it's difficult to judge whether the election was invalid, but in the end, he was clearly elected by the majority, and there was, after all, no qualified objection to the procedure, Muller told LifeSite News. And even if there were deficiencies, they have simply been de facto cured by the exercise of the office, which is what I've been saying forever, because I've been arguing, even if somehow the election was null and void, which it wasn't, but even if somehow it was, universal and peaceful acceptance at the time of his elevation would heal in the root any problems. It continues, even if someone were to challenge that now, it would be a huge mess, he noted. It would even be worse than what we have now. Sure, but he doesn't connect the dots and realize how massive of a mess his own view that a formerly heretical pope automatically loses the papacy is. He doesn't realize how problematic that is. So it continues, through these three popes, the Avignon papacy, the schism, the Great Western Schism, or the Babylonian captivity of the church, these were ultimately partly responsible for that Reformation. The authority of the papacy had been so diminished that in this crisis with Luther, there was simply not enough authority to master this whole situation. Muller stressed that a challenge to the papal election would do more harm than good and emphasized that the good of the church must be kept in mind. Somebody says the audio is bad. Let's see. Can y'all hear me? Testing. 1, 2, 3. How's the audio now? Is it any better? Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let me know in the chat. It's cutting in and out. All right. Is it still cutting in and out? Or is it consistent at this point? Still cutting out every second. Okay. Let me come right back. Give me 1 second. All right. Let me know how we're doing there in the chat. If you can hear me a little bit more consistently now. I exited and unplugged the mic and plugged it back in. See if that helps any. Testing, testing, testing. So let me know. Let me know in the chat. Okay, much better, they say. All right, good deal. So let me share my screen once again, and let's continue. Okay. Can a pope change the moral teaching of the church? Muller emphasized that a pope cannot abolish the character of sin, and that every sin is evil in itself. Muller, furthermore, stressed that the pope could neither officially introduce the blessing of homosexual couples nor the ordination of women because he has no authority to do so. He says, well, if that were to happen, it would be invalid because the blessing of sin would be blasphemy. Well, Pope Francis has already said you can't bless sin. So why put this into doubt? As if Pope Francis is somehow changing his view. Those who would carry it out or approve of it would be gravely culpable. The Pope cannot introduce the diaconate of women in the sense of the sacrament of holy orders because the Pope cannot introduce new sacraments and new conditions. That one, he's assuming that women deaconesses in church history were not sacramental. And I might be willing to agree with him, but he doesn't need to just merely assert it. He needs to demonstrate that, because that is highly debated, whether or not deaconesses in the Catholic Church, even found in the Latin West into the second millennium, whether or not they were sacramental or not. They certainly had the laying on of hands, but there is still a question on whether or not it was sacramental. Okay, one can change the rite of the sacraments, the external rite. One can say, pray the Gloria perhaps at the end or at the beginning, but he cannot change the substance of the sacraments. And the question of the minister and recipient of the sacraments is part of the substance. I agree, per Trent, he cannot change the substance of the sacraments. However, you do have a very, very long history of the Catholic Church changing, in some cases, the form, and in other cases, the matter of the sacrament. In this particular case, I might just actually agree with him, but he needs to demonstrate the truthfulness of what he says, not merely assume it. The diaconate, insofar as it designates a level within one sacrament of holy orders, cannot be changed by the Pope, Muller continued. This goes beyond his authority. Well, it still begs the question, were women sacramentally ordained as deaconesses? It still begs that question. This is why John Paul II did not say, I forbid this, but the church has no authority. Now, actually, no. This is sloppy on part of the cardinal. What Pope John Paul II said was in reference to the presbyterate. He said nothing about the diaconate. He said that he has no authority to change the church's position on ordaining women to the priesthood. He did not, however, address the diaconate in that document. So I don't know why he is being very sloppy here. It continues, and the issue is not, and this was also definitely decided, dependent on changing sociological circumstances, but is to be understood from the nature of the sacrament. The diaconate is nevertheless linked to this priestly level of ordination, that it is one sacrament. The Council of Trent says it is one of the 7 sacraments of the church. It is one sacrament, Muller stressed. Yeah, it's one sacrament, but there's different grades to it, of course, which he knows that. He recognizes that. And then the question is, we already know that women cannot be elevated to grade 2 and 3 of the sacrament of ordination. The question still is, however, can they be elevated to the first order, which is the diaconate? I might just agree with him that they can't be, but he needs to demonstrate that, not assume it, and then not give me shoddy evidence like John Paul II's Ordinatio Sacerdotales, which has nothing to do with the with the diaconate, but is only about the presbyterate. Okay, so this was again released today, November 7th, 10:21 a.m., but is no longer available at LifeSite News. Don't know why they yanked it down. Mahovo, I see your comment there, but I don't agree with it. He says, since this article is taken down, I think it's reasonable to think that the whole thing is probably fake and they were caught in a lie. I don't think that they just made up a fake interview. No, I don't see them doing that. They may sit on an interview for weeks, but I don't see them just making up a completely fake interview. I don't have a reason to believe that they would do that. But your guess is good as mine as to why they would yank it. Perhaps the cardinal realized he made some mistakes in it and asked him to take it down. Perhaps he realized it was unwise. I don't know. But for one reason or another, it was taken down. But you know what? Still needed to be addressed. And there are still other outlets out there that have created articles based on that interview and are then talking about it there as well. So it's not just going to disappear. It's still something we have to discuss, which is why I did the video on it. Also, to again raise the question, is the cardinal in violation of the 8th Ecumenical Council? And noting how much he has changed since 2019 in this very troubling direction, to the point that he's not correcting wild sedevacantist arguments. I hope that he doesn't continue to go down the trajectory he's going. Because if he continues to go down this trajectory, this could be Vigano 2.0. It could be another case of someone who ends up becoming another Vigano. And I don't want to see that for him. I would like to see him go back to what he was doing in 2019. That was good stuff. That was a cardinal I could get along with. This other one, I don't know what's going on. I don't recognize him. He's maybe he's just in the wrong crowd. Maybe he holds resentment from being removed from the DDF by Pope Francis. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But there have been some significant changes, and he's been very, very vocal against Pope Francis. with very bad arguments, very shoddy arguments, taking all kinds of misinformation for granted and then promoting it publicly, not fully accounting for the data that is out there. It's just troubling to see this from the head of someone who used to be over the DDF. And then to see him taking shots at the current head of the DDF. I mean, that's an issue itself. More troubling is him taking shots at the Pope. I mean, the successor of St. Peter. That's, I think, the worst of it. So I was very alarmed by that, as you could imagine, when I first saw it. And I just hope he doesn't continue to go down this direction. I hope he starts surrounding himself with better advisors who can inform him better. Because it doesn't sound like he is getting the best advice that he could really get. So let's pray for him that he does the right thing, that he turns the other way and doesn't continue to go down this trajectory. That's certainly my prayer. He could do a whole lot of good for the church still. It's not too late. It's never too late to turn away. Never too late to undo the mess that you've done. You know, whatever damage one has done, it's never too late to turn away from it and undo it. While you still have breath in your lungs, you can still turn away and do that. And I really hope he does that, because he could be a great, great contribution to the church to help assist the Holy Father in guiding us through these very difficult times by bolstering the Holy Father, by supporting him, by reassuring us of the magisterium and Pope Francis's words and decisions, rather than putting them into doubt and even accusing him of heresy. All right, well, that's going to do it for today. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Check me out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology, if you want to support me. Also, I put a GoFundMe link and a PayPal link there in the show notes if you would rather support me through those platforms. So certainly consider doing that. I would greatly appreciate the support. All right, I'll see you later. God bless.
Are you a Catholic thinking about converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? Or are you a Protestant discerning whether or not to become Catholic or Eastern Orthodox? If so, I have the book just for you. It's called Answering Orthodoxy, and engages all of the arguments that Eastern Orthodox use against the Catholic Church. I respond to all of them. I show that they are in error, and in fact, they're inconsistent, because the things that Orthodox are objecting to are in fact found in their own tradition. So the fullness of the faith can only be found in the Catholic Church. Check out the book right now at shop.catholic.com for your copy today.